Good morning, grade 10s. This is a little program that I put together to help you study for the IT exam on Thursday, I believe. Right, so this is one that I put together. Feel free to pause the video and make this form yourself, either now or after you've watched the video once, if you would like to practice it as well. If you don't have access to Delphi for whatever reason, please use a piece of paper and a pen and write down the code. When I was in university, we didn't write a single test or exam except that it was on a piece of paper with a pen. And we had to write out all of the code, which makes it a lot more difficult, but it also ensures that you know the code a lot better than even typing it in Delphi itself. So it is good practice. If you don't have Delphi, that's not an excuse. You must get out a pen and paper and write out the code and double check it afterwards. All right, so what's happening with this program? This is a mark calculator, kind of like one that I'll be using to calculate your mark at the end of the year. So there's three inputs. There's the year mark, which includes term 1, 2, and 3, all the tests and exams. Then there's the PAT mark out of 180, and then there is the final year-end exam, which counts out of 300 marks. As far as the weightings go, the year mark will count 25, the PAT will count 25, and the exam will count 50%, so that makes a total of 100% of the year mark. Right, we'll calculate the mark when we click this button, but a mark must be moderated, and sometimes a moderator finds that a certain mistake was made with all the exam papers, and so they can adjust the mark by a certain percentage. In this program, if a moderator would like to adjust the mark, they will tick this checkbox, they will select what percentage they would like to adjust the mark by, and then they will do so by clicking that button. Once all of that's been done, we can evaluate to see if the performance of this particular learner was above average or below average by clicking on one of these two radio buttons. So let us begin. We'll do this in stages. The first stage will be to collect the 3 marks, convert them to a percentage, and then get a total mark with the correct weighting. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the calculate mark button. When I double click on an item like this button, it will create an event, a procedure event. If we have a look over here, it says T form 1, that's the name of this program, the name of the form, because I haven't given it a proper name yet. And then dot, the name of the item which I clicked, which was the button. So BTN calculate is the name. And then it says click, because this is the click event. Whatever code I write in here between the begin and end, when a user clicks on the button, that code will activate only then when they click on it. Right, so that's what happens if I double click over there. BTN calculate, click event. All right, now I can start. So I want to capture the 3 marks. I'm going to start by first creating variables for them, okay? Let's make them integer, I suppose, for now. So I, Y mark, that is for the year mark. I, P mark, that's for the PAT. And I, E mark, that's for the exam. So all 3 of those are going to be integer variables. Let's go ahead and capture it. When we capture something from an edit box, we have to go ahead and look, okay, what's this edit box called? So this is EDT Y mark, that one is EDT P mark, and this one over here is EDT E mark. We can see on the little tooltip that pops up, but also when you select something, if you look over here to the left hand side, it highlights over there as well, so we can see the name. All right, so we'll start with the year mark. That's going to be in equals to string to int edt y mark dot text. Okay, so we're taking the edit box where the user typed in the mark, and we're going to place it in this variable called IY mark. We have to convert it to an integer because this is a string and that is a integer. They don't go together, they must be the same. So we convert the edit box from a string to an int so that it can go into an integer. We're going to do that with all of them. IP mark is equal to string to int edt p mark dot text. The last one, IE mark, is equal to string to int, because we're going from a string to an integer here, edt e mark dot text. Good. Now we have all three marks. We have the year mark, the pat, and the exam mark, and we're going to use, they're stored in these three variables. So now we can use these three values and we can do our calculations. Now, the first step is to convert them into a percentage, right, out of 100. So I'm going to go ahead and create another three variables, but this time they're going to be real variables. Why? Because when we convert them to a percentage, it might not be a whole number. They might be converted into, let's say, 50.5%. So we can't keep that kind of number in an integer. It must be a real. So RY mark, I'm just going to go ahead and create a real version of each of these. RP mark and RE mark. All three of these are going to be real, and so we can do a conversion here. So RY mark is going to be equal to, now how do I convert the year mark into a percentage? Well, we have to see, okay, the year mark is out of 300. So whatever they got out of 300, we can do that by saying, okay, so this is what they got, IY mark, multiply that by 100, and then divide it by how much the test was out of, or let's say how much the year mark is out of, which is 300. And that will give us a percentage out of 100. Okay, we'll do the same for the next one. RP mark is equal to their pat mark multiplied by 100, because we want 100 out of 100%, and divide by how much the pat was out of. The pat was out of 180. See, this over here is just maths. What we're doing, the way we're doing it is IT, but the actual calculation itself is just maths. And that's why IT is quite a mathematical subject. Multiply that by 100, and the exam mark is out of 300 as well, so we're going to divide that by 300. All right. So now we have all three marks in a percentage form out of 100, obviously, because it's percent. Okay, you see how we're going step by step? That was step 1, that was step 2. A lot of the time, students ask me, especially grade 10s, so where do I start? I don't know where to start. And that is a decision that you have to make yourself. It's a very important decision. So it's a good question, and it depends obviously on the question. Okay, when I looked at this, the first thing I said is, let me first get the input, then I can decide what I'm going to do with it. That was step 1, and there step 1 was completed. Now that I had the marks, I knew, okay, in order to calculate, I need to convert them to percentage. And so I did that. That was step 2. Now I can think, right, what is my step 3 going to be? I need to convert all three separate marks into one big year mark. I know that the year mark over here so far is 25%, the pat mark is 25%, and the exam will count for 50% of the final mark. So I can go ahead and create another real variable called R final mark. Okay, that's going to be a real variable again because it could be a, well, it's going to be a percentage. So it could be 50.5, 60.1, something like that. So it must be real. Also, another giveaway is whenever you're dividing, you know you're probably going to put that into a real. Because when you divide by something, the chance that you get something that's not a whole number is quite high. Okay, so our final mark is going to be as follows. I need to convert each of these into their respective percentages. So remembering BODMAS, that's why I'm using brackets here, RY mark multiplied by 0.25. Why am I doing that? Because the year mark counts for 25% or 1/4 of the full final mark. So 0.25 is 25%, it's 1/4. You could have said multiplied by 25 divided by 100. That would give you the same answer, but I'm just going to take the shortcut and say multiplied by 0.25. So that's in its own set of brackets because BODMAS plus RP, the pat mark, multiply that. That's also out of 25% for the final mark. So that's in its own set of brackets. And then I'm going to add that to RE mark multiplied by 0.5 because that is 50%. There we go. All right, as long as at the end of the day, all of this adds up to 100, and it does. So that's our final mark. All we need to do now is to display it. And we're going to display it in this label here called LBL display. LBL display dot caption is equal to. Now, when you display something onto the form, especially in a caption or in a label in this instance, it must be a string when you display it. So we want to display the final mark, right? But it's a real, so we can't display it as it is. We must convert it from a float, which basically means real, to string. Float to string, our final mark. Just like that. All right, we won't round it off yet. We'll just see what it looks like as it is. Let's give it a try. Okay, so let's have a look. I do have an example here. Let me see what values I want to put in here. All right. Let's say 225 out of 300 for the year mark. And this person got 157 out of 180 for his PAT, which is very good. And 241 for his exam, which is not bad at all. Let's calculate his mark. All right, he's got 80.72 recurring percent. It's actually something that I forgot here. Okay, first of all, before we make adjustments, it looks like it's working correctly, right? That's 80.72%. It doesn't really look nice though, so what I want to do is I want to format this to 1 decimal place, and that's what I'm going to do. When you are converting from a float or a real to a string, you can format the output just by adding an F after the float to string F over there. Right, we'll need to make some adjustments to our brackets over here. So what we are displaying, our final mark, stays there, but now we're going to put a comma afterwards to signal that we are moving to the second parameter. Now, it's at this point where you say, right, I want to format, let's say, as a currency. So I'll say FF currency, and that will give you rands and cents. But that's not what I want, not now. Obviously, I'm showing a percentage, not a currency. So there is another one called FF fixed, which you can use to round off other values that aren't currency. So I'm going to always put a 10, and then I want 1 decimal place. Okay, so the 10, you don't need to really worry about that. You can just go ahead and slap 10 there every single time. The last one, though, is important. That signals how many decimal places you're going to have. I want 1. If I was displaying a currency, remember currencies have senses, so that would be 2 decimal places in that case, but this is fine like it is now. After this, I would like the percentage logo to show. So at the end here, I'm going to say plus, and I'm going to put a percentage logo in quotation. Now let's see what it looks like. Okay, so 225, which is still not a bad mark. 157 out of 180, which is a great mark, and 241. So this is a pretty decent student. Here we go, 80.7%. Now, if you're in an exam, it's at this point where your examiner most likely will have a screenshot of what the output should look like, and with some example input. If you follow and use the same input that they have, you should be able to see that your answer matches theirs. So that's a good way to test that you're on the right track. But anyways, we've done the first part now. Calculate the mark. So far, this individual has 80.7% for his final grade 10 mark. Very good. Now we want to moderate it. Okay, so I'm going to close this program now. We want to moderate it, or somebody else is going to come afterwards and moderate it. If they find that there needs to be some adjustments, they are going to make it. What they'll do is they'll tick the checkbox if they would like to make the adjustments. Then they will specify by what percentage, and then they will go ahead and click the button to make those adjustments come into effect. So that means we're going to go ahead and code inside the moderate mark, which is actually called btn moderate, and we are inside the click event. Okay. Now that reminds me, and I suppose you could say I've made a mistake so far. If I need to use the final mark from this previous button, the calculate mark button, if I need to use that value inside the btn moderate click, those are 2 separate procedures. They're 2 separate buttons. That means our final mark should have been declared as a global variable, not a local variable. So I'm going to correct that mistake. All my other code is fine. I just need to make sure that I remove this and I declare it as a variable over here where the global variables are declared. So our final mark is now not just stuck in the calculate button, it's now available to every single procedure throughout the entire program. And I'll be able to use it inside my moderate mark button. Good. Now, where do I start? I only want to do adjustments if the moderator checked that checkbox, which is called CBX moderate. If they did not do that, then we're not going to adjust the mark at all, right? So we'll start by using an if statement to see if that checkbox was checked. If CBX moderate dot checked, okay, at this point you can say equals true, but if you leave it as dot checked, it also is checking to see if it is true. So it doesn't really make a difference. Now, whatever we type in between this begin and end, it belongs to this if statement. So only if CBX moderate is indeed checked will whatever code we write here execute. If it's not checked, it will ignore it. It will skip over the code and it won't execute it. Yeah, that's the whole point of an if statement, I suppose. So what do we want to do if it is checked? We want to take this input over here, which is sed adjust, because it's a spin edit, not a edit box, it's a spin edit, and we're going to make adjustments with it. So we'll start by collecting the input. That is step 2. Let's make a variable for it. var I adjust, and that's going to be an integer variable. I adjust is going to be equal to set adjust. Okay, set adjust is the name of this box, this spin edit over here. Dot value. Right. So a spin edit has the property dot value, which is quite useful because it returns the value as an integer straight off the bat. We don't have to convert it from a string to an integer. So dot value, we're going to use that. Now that we have the adjusted amount, we're going to correct our final mark to the new amount. So we're going to say, right, our final mark, remember our final mark is not something we calculated in this button, we did it in the previous button. But because we declared our final mark as a global variable, we can use it here as well. So our final mark is going to be equal to our final mark, so what it currently is, plus, and the percentage over there is going to be I adjust. I adjust, sorry, my math is off here. It's our final mark multiplied by R adjust divided by 100. Okay, so we're just going to add the adjusted amount. We're going to say our final mark is equal to what it currently is plus a small percentage increase. So if they had put a 5 there to adjust the mark by 5%, to get the percentage, we have to say, right, 5 divided by 100, then we multiply that over there. Sorted. And now the last thing that we need to do over here is display the new final mark. So LBL display dot caption is equal to float to string f. Okay, we're going to format it. Our final mark. We're going to use a fixed formatting, 10 spaces before and only 1 space after the comma. And we're going to add the percentage at the end as well. There we go. Now remember, this part here will only happen if the checkbox is checked. This display is not between that begin and end. So regardless of whether the checkbox is checked or not, it will still display the final mark. Either it will be the same as what it used to be if no adjustment was made, or it will be slightly increased depending on the adjustment. Let's have a look. So let's put our inputs in again, 225, 157, and 241. Let's calculate that mark, 80.7%. All right. If we just click moderate mark now without checking the checkbox, it's going to stay the same because no adjustment was made. But let's make an adjustment. Let's increase it by 5%. There we go. So he got 84.8% now because we adjusted the mark by an additional 5%. Perfect. All right. Almost done. The only thing we need to do now is to state whether this was above or below average. And we will do that inside this radio group over here. So if we double click on the radio group itself, we will enter the RGP performance. That's the name of the radio group, RGP for radio group performance. Click event. So just like a button, basically any component can have a click event if you click on it. So whatever code we write here between this begin and end will execute when they select one of these options. All right. Now what do we want to do? If they select above average, which is the first option, we are going to just add some text after their mark. We're going to say, well done, your mark was above average. However, if they select below, we're going to say, your mark was below average. Now, how do we know which one the user selected? The first or the second option? We have to say, okay, if RGP performance, that's the name of the radio group, dot item index. Remember that. Whenever we work with a radio group, we work with dot item index. If it is equal to 0, now what is 0? Why 0? Why don't I start with 1? That's because the first option, always the first option, regardless of what the text is, will always be item index 0. The second option will always be item index 1. If there was a third option, it would be item index 2. That's just how it works. Instead of counting from 1, they start counting from 0. So 0 over here, item index equals 0. That is the first option we have over there. So if they select that option, we're going to say, okay, LBL display dot caption is equal to LBL display plus, or dot caption plus you are above average. Okay, and we can use a else over here. Else LBL display dot caption is equal to LBL display dot caption plus you are below average. Let's look and see how that runs. $80.7. Let's adjust that by 5%. Okay, 84.8. I think that's above average, so let's click on this option. There we go. You are above average. Now, why did I say LBL display.caption is equal to itself, basically? LBL display.caption is equal to LBL display.caption. Because LBL display, the label, which we are displaying the percentage in, already has something that's there. It's the final mark. It's already displayed inside the label. So if I didn't say that, it would have replaced that mark with you are above average, and it would have only said you are above average. It wouldn't display the mark anymore. So I wanted to keep the mark there, and then after the mark, I wanted to say you are above or below average. So I said, okay, the LBL display.caption is going to be equal to what it currently already is, plus at the end, add on you are either above or below average. And that's what it's done over here. If we click below, okay, it adds even more there at the end. Okay, let's have a look at this if statement that I have here. If RGP performance.item index equals 0, we know that that is always the first option, in this case above average. Then we are going to display that. Else, meaning that if this is false, if it's not 0, then, or if it's anything else except 0, then we are going to display that instead. The reason why I can do this is because there's only two options here. Meaning that, well, if item index is not 0, then it's obviously the other option. So I don't have to specify, okay, if RGP performance.item index equals 1. I don't have to do that in this case because there is only two options. All right. And I think we will leave it at that.